Yeah. Perfect. I'm going to put you in, Samina, now.
Hello and good afternoon, and also a very warm welcome back to the final session of today. And it is our fifth panel, which asks the question, can the digital skills divide be closed? Now, the greatest challenge for the public sector is having the right people with the right skills to deliver the right service to their communities. Technology, as we all know, is constantly evolving, and this widens the digital skills gap. But can the public sector close or even reduce that gap? Is training the solution, or should public sector be looking at outsourcing to the private sector? How can technology help? Can public sector reduce the need for specific training to close that gap? Well, lots of questions. And as always, we have a fabulous panel lined up to hopefully give us some answers and share best practice. Let me introduce you to our panelists, and they are Jonathan Pownall, who's the Senior Digital Specialist at NAO. We also have Penny Syddall, who's the Programme Manager, Skills and Adoption, Transformation, Innovation and Digital for Dorset Council. And we have Lee Dunn, who's the Head of Scottish Digital Academy. So welcome to you all. And as always, audience, if you have any questions, please use the Ask Your Question button, and we'll include those as much as possible. So welcome to the discussion. Lee, if we could start with you, tell us, where are we with the digital skills gap right now? And what are the quick wins, perhaps, to address that gap?
Thanks, Samina, for the introduction. So we'll start off with where we are right now, and then we'll come back to the quick wins and some of the areas that I think that we can focus on to try and address where the gaps might be. I think there are two parts to this question, and the first thing that I want to address is, what do we actually mean by a gap? Because I think that's quite often a misnomer in itself. We occasionally think that a gap is where there are no skills and it doesn't exist and there's nothing there at the moment. And sometimes that can be correct and that can be the case. But more often than not, a gap is actually a reference to the level of expertise and skill that exists in one particular area. So perhaps we have a focus of a working or a practitioner level of knowledge and expertise when we actually want it to be an expert level of practice. So that's what we mean by a gap. So there are numerous reports, and I think Jonathan might talk about some of that later on. What I will talk about is some of the work that we've done in Scotland across our digital data and technology professions and across the wider public and third sector to identify where some of those gaps might actually be. So we know that there's a gap around transformation capability, in particular around agile practice, product management, delivery management, and business analysis. We know that there is a gap there. We know that there's a gap around penetration testing. Now, that's an interesting one because sometimes those gaps are there for good reason. So we wouldn't expect organisations across the public sector necessarily to be expert at penetration testing, because quite often or not, that's outsourced to a specialised organisation to do that on our behalf. But it is a gap nonetheless. We also know that there is a gap around prototyping and coding, automation and testing. And we know that there's a gap around service design, which is a really interesting gap to actually focus upon, because service design cuts across a whole range of those different aspects that I've spoke of, especially, of course, around transformation. Interestingly, when you look across the wider piece, we know that there are gaps as well around digital literacy and data literacy. And these are areas that we need to focus on. And the digital literacy one is an interesting one, because I think quite often or not, we jump straight into things like cyber and cloud and AI without actually considering the use of technology in the first instance. I'll give you a very quick example, and then I'll talk about some of the quick wins. So if you're a practitioner or a nurse, for example, in the NHS and you are using an iPad or a digital device to transfer patient records or to store information, you first have to know how to use that digital device before you can actually use it for work purposes. So sometimes we have some of those gaps as well. So in terms of the quick wins and what we need to do, well, let's start off on that last piece around understanding what is a business critical skill and what's a nice to have. So we need to take that wider view across the public sector and consider, well, what do we actually really need right now? So what's the immediate need, but also to try and be proactive and thinking ahead. So what might that need look like in 12 months and 24 months? And research and the reporting mechanisms that we have available to us can help inform some of that line of thinking. The basic awareness of skills that are required, well, we need to start there as well, because it's also a misnomer that everybody starts at a level of no knowledge, when in fact we all come to our own professional working environment with different levels of knowledge and skill already, whether that's something from home or previous experiences that we've had. So we need to understand what that looks like. So there's a quick win around some of that and understanding that landscape and surveying. I was about to say audit, but I don't want to use that word specifically because that has a very specific meaning. Surveying or understanding the skill set that already exists within a particular organization to understand that capability. We can't begin to address the gaps and apply resource into an organization or across the public sector if we first don't understand exactly what that capability looks like in terms of strength and weakness. So a quick win for us is actually trying to understand that, to get our heads around it, especially in the fiscal climate, so that we can start to plug resource where it's actually needed. And the last thing I'll mention there as well is probably something around using technology itself. So there's a quick win in using technology-mediated learning, online professional learning experiences that are perhaps self-directed, where one can access a skill or a knowledge database to be able to upskill and reskill around a very specific theme. So I'm thinking around things like the ONS Data Masterclass, for example, which is offered for senior leaders across public sector. That's delivered online through the Future Learn platform. So there are things like that that we can focus on as well.
Okay, and presumably a lot of that isn't happening at the moment.
I think it's happening, but to varying extents, right. And I think it's pockets of good practice. We don't have perhaps a holistic strategy to focus all of that going forwards.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Jonathan, how do you think the position on skills shortages has changed since the National Audit Office previously reported on the skills gap in government? And I know Lee mentioned there's been various reports, so I'll let you bring us up to date, basically.
Well, so obviously we're government's independent auditor, so I come at this from the position of what we see across our work. And it's very interesting just looking back over some of our reports, how history tends to repeat itself. So back in 2011, we published a review 6 months into what was then the latest government digital strategy. That was the one that even predated the creation of GDS. And what we said then was the Cabinet Office has made a positive and productive start to implementing the strategy. And then we said the government's implementing the strategy differently from previous strategies, and there's a greater chance it will be embedded within departments. But then we went on to say, against this positive background, we have some significant concerns, one of which was capability. We said key immediate skill gaps haven't been filled, and that although these concerns can be dealt with, they do need to be addressed in the short term if they're not going to be a barrier to progress. So that was in 2011. In 2013, we produced another report on the impact of government's ICT savings initiatives. And in that one, we said skills remains a challenge across government and there's capacity and capability gaps opening up. Fast forward to 2015, we published a survey on the digital skills gap in government. And again, we found the market, recruitment, procurement processes all still challenges. And although there's some initiatives underway to address those challenges, we posed the question in our report whether there was realism about the scale of what could be achieved on transformation within those resources and skills. So sounds a bit deja vu, doesn't it? There's a fairly consistent picture here. And to bring it back to the question, more recently I was part of the team looking last year at the MOD's implementation of its digital strategy for defence. It was an early look at their strategy, and what we said then is the MOD doesn't have enough people with the right digital skills, so it goes to Lee's point about definition of the gap. most people we spoke to as part of that report raised that as one of their top risks. And what we said in the report is that although MOD is trying various things to address this, progress just hasn't been fast enough to match the problem, and probably a different approach is required. So that's the latest that we've reported on. Of course, we've got Mission 4 in last summer's roadmap from the Central Digital and Data Office, and that's looking at digital skills at scale, and it has a number of commitments that are looking at improving recruitment and retention. But if you look over that history, you can see it's the latest in a line of similar initiatives. And I think only time's going to tell whether it's going to be enough in the face of the challenges that I think are still around. Yeah,
and those challenges continue to come, don't they? That's the problem, isn't it? So it's a moving goalpost the entire time. I do want to come back about to talk about the specific skills that you see being required, but I just want to bring Penny in at this stage, because Penny, yours is very much lived experience, and I just wondered if you could tell us about some of the initiatives in Dorset that were created locally to address the identified problems, certainly the ones that you found. For example, I'm thinking about Dorset's Digital Skills Partnership, mapping and gapping. Tell us more about that, please.
Yes, thanks, Samina. So in Dorset, my job is to help skills in the community. So we have another team who's looking at digital skills within Dorset Council, but I'm looking at skills within the community, within the business community, and within the wider community. So we do a number of things to support basic essential digital skills growth, for volunteer digital champions, etc. But we also are addressing what businesses can do. One of the ways that we approach, one of the things that we've done in Dorset is to train up 1,000 frontline staff to help people who need some help in the community. And that has addressed the digital skills of the people who we're training, as well as the people that they're helping. So that's a double win, that particular embedded digital champion programme. We found in Dorset, through doing some network events, digital network events, that there wasn't a strong network around digital. So we created that by doing these events, and that culminated in having a Festival of the Future, where we celebrated a lot of the innovation that's going on in Dorset. And that itself brought together a number of tech companies, which has been really exciting and fun. And we realized that we were providing something that wasn't already there. In Bournemouth, our neighbouring area, which is also part of the Dorset LEP area, but it's a separate authority. They have very good networking among their creative and technical businesses, but we in the rural part of Dorset didn't have that. So being able to create that has been great, and coming together with what Bournemouth have got, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole have got, to create a digital skills partnership. It's not an official government one. It's one that we've just done on the side. I think DCMS are okay with us doing that, but it's not one that's supported by them. But we thought it was just such a good idea to bring people together and understand what is being provided across Dorset in terms of digital skills for businesses, because at the time there really wasn't that. So that was the mapping. We mapped what was being provided at an essential digital skills level, at a medium skills level, and at advanced skills level. The government have asked our Dorset Chamber to run an exercise called the Local Skills Improvement Plan, which is finding out what businesses want in terms of skills provision. And by putting that together with our mapping, we've got this mapping and gapping. We're going to be able to, when we get the full results of the survey, we're going to be able to see where the gaps are, and therefore where we can put our energies. One of the things we knew was this bringing the tech companies together. And one of the problems that we have in Dorset is that kids grow up, then they leave Dorset to go to university, and they don't come back until they're much, much older, sometimes when they have families, or sometimes not until they're retired. And we have a very, very high elderly population. And so trying to keep young talent in Dorset is one of our key aims. And so if we can provide a pathway for young people to see that Dorset is actually a digital place, it has lots of digital innovation going on here. So we need to demonstrate that and show them that there's lots of opportunity to have exciting tech careers here in beautiful rural Dorset and live on the Jurassic Coast and have a tech career, then that's the message that we're trying to get across. So building links with schools and between schools and the tech companies is one of our aims. And we did that really successfully last year with Dorset's first coding day, which was provided by Barclays Digital Eagles. And it was fantastic. We had over 40 schools involved, 2,000 students took part. They loved it. Tech businesses brought their staff into the schools to help with the coding day sessions. And so links were created there. And they're all shouting that we should do it again this year. So of course we're going to.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, it sounds very much like it was an organic process as well, and that things grew as you were putting things in place, and it was win-win all the time. And it sounds very interesting what you're saying about the young people as well, and keeping that talent within the area. I was just wondering about how you developed that network ecosystem of tech businesses, because I know you said you found tech companies. Was it just a question of word spreading and getting into that circle, so to speak?
Yes, it was. Dorset's a small place and everybody knows each other. So you start, you know, it's a snowballing thing. You start with some people and people know people and suggest people. And we have economic development officers who had links. So we worked with them. Yes, it snowballed like that. And people who'd been involved in some of our events previously, we just pooled all the contacts that we had and came up with a list. And actually, calling them and saying, we're doing this thing, do you want to take part? I don't think any tech business said no. Everybody that we called said yes, they wanted to get on board with that. So we were really lucky. And I think we just hit the zeitgeist. We hit something right, hit something that the tech companies wanted to get involved with, and the schools, it was going to be helpful for them to develop their coding in school as well. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's something perhaps other regions could take on as well and try as well. So thank you for that, Penny. Lee, I just wondered, you know, when we're identifying professional learning and also development needs, obviously you need a certain degree of honesty, but how do you go about doing that and actually saying, this is what I need?
Yes, so I think there's a few things that can help in this space, because one of the challenges of accessing professional learning is not necessarily that there is no professional learning out there. It's actually there is so much out there to varying different extents, and how do you actually navigate through some of that? So I think the first thing is to understand your own strengths and your own areas for development. And there are a number of ways you can do that. So I'm thinking here around things like the DDAT capability framework, Sophia. So there are frameworks out there which will allow you to understand the skills that underpin digital and where you may be particularly strong or not so strong. So within that, we need to get better at self-diagnostic or an evaluation methodology that allows somebody to understand where they may be. I think one of the real risks and dangers is that we focus too much on breadth, and that we just deploy all of these different opportunities out into the ecosystem. And as I say, it becomes conflated and complex, when in fact what we really want to do is not just focus on breadth, but also focus on depth of learning. So if we can help people to understand where they are in their journey, and then help them to say, well, perhaps you need X, Y, and Z to be able to progress and upskill in a particular area, we need to be able to show them where those opportunities actually sit. And crucially, and I think this is probably where the challenge sits, not only do we need to show them where the opportunities are, but we have to actually have the opportunities readily available. Because there's nothing worse than saying to somebody, you need X, Y, and Z. We've done all of this diagnostic stuff. Go and learn these things. Oh, but by the way, that's not going to be available for another 12 months because we don't have that available. So we need to be able to get better at that horizon scanning, understand the skills, and making sure that the opportunities are available in that space. I also, there's probably something there around the culture of public sector and the organisations in which we work, whereby we take a coaching or a mentoring approach through line management, for example, or through other opportunities. so that individuals can explore some of this, because yes, we want to give people the opportunity to take that universal approach and to be able to find things themselves. But perhaps sometimes you actually need to sit down and speak to somebody to get their guidance, to get their advice from a more knowledgeable other, for example. So I think we need to get a little bit better at that as well. So there are opportunities there. And as I said earlier, we do maximise on those on occasion, but we don't really deploy that in its widest sense. And if we want to make a real inroads to help people access and navigate some of these things, then we also need to focus on things like accessibility and diversity, for example, because we often know as well that we also disclude portions of the population who can't access professional learning for whatever reason. So we need to get better at understanding and unpicking some of that as well.
And when can you identify that? I'm just thinking about having some honest conversations, perhaps, as you say, maybe through the mentoring or through the learning stage. Is it a case of making time to identify that that lack of skills? Because it is an honest conversation, isn't it? It can be maybe a little bit brutal.
Yeah, it's an honest conversation. It has to be an honest two-way conversation as well. Yeah. I think, again, I could speak all day about the barriers and the reasons why we're probably not in the good state that we want to be in. I think one of the other risks that we face is around the impression that professional learning and space and time to do all of this stuff is bolted onto the day job. So we all have very busy lives and we get caught up in that culture of busyness. Where do we actually make time? And I know from facilitating, providing professional learning in the past, quite often somebody signs up to something. I've done it myself. I've signed up to something with the best intentions. And then on the day when I'm due to go, whether it's online or face-to-face, a deadline comes in or there's a report due or something else needs to happen. So I'll just focus on that instead. So yes, we can drive that as individuals, but we also need to drive that organisationally as well through the culture of the organisation, so that the time for professional learning is part of what we do. It becomes part of business as usual, and we're giving people time and space to be able to do that. If we don't address that systemic change, then we will always be caught up in that busy culture that doesn't allow us to always access when we need to.
Okay, great, thank you. Jonathan, I know you told us a little bit about the skill shortages where we're at the moment, but where do you see, or which skills I should say, do you see as being particularly required now and indeed for the foreseeable future?
Well, we see this broadly at two levels, and we're talking, if we talk about major digital transformation in government now. So if we start at the senior leadership level, there's some excellent and there's some very experienced senior digital leaders in government. But what we said in our report from a couple of years ago on the challenges in implementing digital change, sometimes they don't get the attention, understanding and support that they need from their senior decision makers. And sometimes they don't get across the risks and complexities involved in transformation. And there's a wider point on transformation here. I think Lee alluded to it in something he said earlier, that some digital transformation is business transformation, but sometimes an expectation that it's left to the technology community to drive on behalf of the business. But it is those business leaders at the senior level who are making decisions on things like funding, scope of major programs. So to make sure that those leaders make the best decisions, they need what the phrase has been coined, it's called technical fluency. That came from a report that was done a couple of years ago for the Cabinet Office, and it's called Organising for Digital Delivery. And what that report said was, underpinning many of the issues surfaced during this review is a general concern around the relatively underdeveloped level of digital expertise among senior civil service leadership. I mean, these aren't my words, that's the report. You can see it on Gov UK. So in our view, senior leaders just outside the DDAP profession also need to understand enough about the technology environment in government, because for the most part we're not a greenfield, we're not a startup. It's a complex, messy environment. There's legacy, spaghetti junctions of systems, and I think understanding that complexity of transitioning from what already exists is needed. So that's at the senior level. Excuse me. And then on to more specific skills. and the need for all the different areas covered in the digital data and technology profession. I think on that, the specifics are going to vary from organisation to organisation. I know we've heard earlier today about service design, we've heard about data, but I think I'll defer to others who are probably better placed to talk about that in detail for their own organisations.
Okay, all right, thanks, Jonathan. Amy, we've got a question that's come in for you from our audience. Sorry, it is from Amy. It's for you, Penny, I beg your pardon. It says, Penny, how are you closing the digital skills gap with your operational teams? I'm thinking of those who also have attitudinal refusal to engage, but also those that do not have digital access. And I think actually this point was raised earlier on as well, that there's some teams who don't have digital access. So what do you do in that situation?
So within Dorset Council, there is a programme where, because some people don't use digital as part of their day-to-day jobs, and they are getting, the potential is they're getting left behind. So we've got a programme called Bring Your Own Device, so that people can access things like our intranet through their own device, even if they don't have a Dorset Council device. So that helps with some. We have developing a digital pathway on our learning hub so that there is access. People can see the routes to essential digital skills, which we're providing in the community for residents, but so that our staff can access the same support that that's available for our residents, because there's a lot of learning units that are online that people can follow and learn and pick up the basics. They just need to be directed to them. So we're providing that on our learning hub. And obviously our members of staff can go and see our volunteer digital champions, because like Lee said, it's the one-to-one, it's the understanding where you are at that moment and moving you on. And that's absolutely true for the people with no digital skills, but it's true for all of us. We all need a bit of that mentoring and coaching support, because everybody's in a different place. Everybody's got different experiences. Some people who you think of as really digital, you provide them with some new platform and they can't use it. Of course they can't use it. So we all need to improve our digital skills all the time. And providing that, I think mentoring and coaching, we've come to the conclusion, is a very good way to take people forward in the community, as well as our staff at Dorset Council. And the kind of top-down programmes, the boot camps that we provide, and some of the things like Multiply and so on, these top-down programmes from government or from Dorset Council or from the Growth Hub or whatever, don't always hit it. And actually you need to do much more one-to-one support for people. Did I answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yes, I think you did. You certainly gave us an example, so that was great. And you did. And I've just noticed we've got a couple of minutes, so I just want to get in one question certainly, and that's addressing the issue of diversity and inclusion when it comes to developing digital skills. Lee, could you tell us how that's possible and how it's being done successfully?
Yeah, I'll be really succinct just with time running out. So I think we can take a universal approach first and foremost. So we can try and consider how and when we push out professional learning, so that we can include as many diverse groups as possible. So I'm thinking here specifically perhaps around somebody who's a single parent, for example, especially in the world of hybrid working. We need to be cognizant of that. I think we can also take a targeted approach and look to try and include specific groups. So for example, through the Scottish Digital Academy, we have empowering women to lead cybersecurity and transformation programs, which are for women. And also, I think we can also use technology in that space as well. So we're developing an inclusive learning application at the moment, which is not an LMS, but is designed specifically to try and bridge that hybrid mode of delivery, and again, also to account for those who are perhaps neurodiverse. So we're starting to look at that kind of inclusive technology as well. So I think there's lots of different things that we can do. My thing is probably just to try some of these things out, see what works. If it doesn't, then we change it or don't do it again. And if it does work, how do we actually take something which perhaps really valuable and scale that up so that we can increase reach and scope. And I think the last point that I will make is it's all very well thinking about all the stuff that we do know, but we also need to listen as well, because I think quite often we get caught up in the things that we do know. So what are the things that we don't know? Who can inform that? People are coming to us and saying, I can't access, or perhaps there is a group that's underrepresented, then we need to try and think about how we can address that as well.
Okay, and very last question to you, Jonathan. The discussion is digital skills divide. Can that actually be closed, the gap in particular? What are the prospects for success, in your opinion?
Well, as you've gathered, capacity and capability, these have been a running theme for our reports for a number of years now. Some of you might be aware that we're actually doing another piece of work right at the moment, looking on how the new CDO roadmap's trying to address these. So obviously we've not published that report yet, but I don't think it'll surprise anyone to know that skills feature again, and in that we talk about both the digital capability of building for the senior leaders, and then efforts to close the skills gap by more in-house recruitment and those specific DDAT areas that have been mentioned. I think it's fair to say that government's still finding challenges there. Now, I know there's a target to bring down vacancy rates, and things have been happening on pay, and we do wish every success of these initiatives, but we'll have to see whether it's going to be enough this time round. And I think to be honest, we do see a risk that we may well be in the same position again, because it is a very competitive market out there. I'll just add as a postscript that early this week I was presenting to a group of delegates from the NEO's equivalent organisations across Europe. We were talking about these sorts of issues, and they told me they're seeing similar challenges in their own countries, so it isn't just us. Okay,
so it is a global issue then. We're not on our own, is what you're saying. I'm taking the positive from that rather than the negative. Okay, we will have to leave it there. So thank you to our panellists, who are Jonathan, Penny and Lee. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon and for giving us that insight. We've certainly enjoyed listening to you, so thank you very much. And indeed, audience, thank you for your questions and also for taking part today. I know we've covered a whole range of challenges, opportunities and solutions as we've discussed public sector learning and development today. And I hope you have enjoyed each of the discussions that you've heard. Now, whether you have been one of our many excellent panellists who've been with us, or you're part of the audience who've been sending in questions, a big thank you to you from all the team here at PSC 365. Thank you also to our fantastic partners, without whom events like this would simply not be possible. And please don't forget our next event, which is on public sector decarbonisation, another hot topic. That's on the 21st of March, 2023. Please share this information with your colleagues, because we'd love to welcome new faces onto the platform and to hear other points of view as well. Now, today's event was CPD certified. You've got 1 CPD point earned for every hour of live content watched. And if you would like to claim your certificate, then please email marketing@cognitivepublishing.com. That is it from me and everyone at PSC 365. Thank you for being such a great audience. We really do hope you've enjoyed the day. Have a lovely evening. And from us, bye-bye.
Thank you. Do take care. All right. Take care, Samina.